The Theater History Podcast is supported by HowlRound, a Knowledge Commons by and for the theater community. It's available on iTunes and howlround.com.
¡Ahí te voy! ¡Eso! ¡Es hermano que no entiendes!
Hi, and welcome to the Theater History Podcast. I'm Mike Leager, and my guest today is Jorge Huerta. He's the Chancellor's Associates Professor of Theater Emeritus at the University of California, San Diego. Jorge, thank you so much for being on the show.
No, thank you.
Now, I want to talk to you today about a number of things, but let's start in 1968. You are a high school drama teacher at the time, and that's the year that you encounter a group called El Teatro Campesino. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that group and about your experience of encountering them.
Yeah, I was teaching outside of LA, east of East LA in Rubidoux, California. I tell my students today that teaching high school drama back then, I was Glee before there was Glee. And I was asked by an activist Chicano friend to go see this group at the University of California, Riverside, down the way. And I did. And it was a group of farm workers and led by Luis Valdez. And they were performing short skits called actos about the farm worker situation. They were singing huelga or strike songs. They were very much a part of the farm workers movement, the farm workers founded by the late Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. And so watching them and listening to them performing in Spanglish, the language that we were raised here in Southern California, speaking both English and Spanish, it was quite revealing. I had never seen anything like it. And I thought, well, this is really, really amazing. This is theater that is for something, it was about social justice for farm workers. So that was the beginning of that. That was the seed that was planted. And 2 years later, I enrolled in the PhD program at the University of California, Santa Barbara to pursue a doctorate in dramatic art in order to be able to investigate this thing that I had discovered 2 years before, that I had a theatrical heritage that I did not realize it was there.
You've talked about the legacy of El Teatro Campesino, which is still going strong today. Mm-hmm. You write in a piece from last year in HowlRound, I believe that all of the theatrical activity of Chicanas and Chicanos, indeed Latinas and Latinos, from community and student teatros to professional theater companies and individual theater artists and filmmakers, owe their existence directly or indirectly to Luis Valdez and the Teatro Campesino. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that aesthetic was that was so influential. You mentioned that it's for farm workers and later it moves into urban barrios. But I wonder if you could explain a little bit about how this kind of theater worked.
Well, for one, Luis Valdez had studied at San Jose State College as an undergrad and an MA student in English, actually, and that's where he began to write plays. And in 1964, he was on the first Venceremos Brigade to Cuba and was quite politicized by that, and then worked with the San Francisco Mime Troupe until 65, when he went to the Farm Workers Union and said, look, we can do theater in the streets, we can do theater in the fields, let's try to organize the farm workers, showing them, demonstrating a la Brecht, a la Commedia dell'arte that he had learned with the mime troupe, using puppets, whatever, let's get out there and educate the people about the need for a union. And it was quite exciting, and they did. And so they collectively created these actos about their situation. And the beauty of it is that they were demonstrating their own reality, what it was like to be a farm worker and to be oppressed by the growers and by their henchmen and by the coyotes, the farm labor contractors. And that led to tours where they would go perform not just in the fields for the farm workers themselves, but they would perform at universities. And I think their first university performance early on was at Stanford. And they realized that they had an audience of students, who were, of course, activists. And there was a burgeoning Chicano movement as well. And of course, there was the civil rights movement, above all of that. And so it was quite a time, it was a very revolutionary moment. And people were looking for means of educating and entertaining their constituencies. And so wherever they went, I have said that they planted seeds of creativity on campuses and community centers across the country. And sometimes those seeds blossomed into little teatros, emulating the Teatro Campesino style. The acto is very, very basic. It's simple but not simplistic. And they published the actos in 1971 and gave them free of royalties to anybody who wanted to do them. And so that was another impetus that then influenced the creation of other groups also creating their own actos. And again, away from the majority of Mexican Americans were and are urban, not rural. A lot of people, because the Teatro Campesino was gained such notoriety and fame, people thought that all Mexicans in this country were farm workers. Well, no, the majority of the Mexican Americans are urban. And so you move naturally, organically into the cities. And now we talk about labor unions, in the industries, in the factories, and you name it. And so that's why I say the Campesino is, it's the beginning of the contemporary Chicano theater movement of the 60s. But in fact, we had a rich heritage, which I discovered when I went to graduate school, as I say, in 1970, and went to the library and discovered a marvelous history of the Spanish religious folk theater. That's what we had throughout the Mexican communities of the U.S., whether that was in the Southwest or even as far as the Midwest. People were doing theater in their churches. And so that also led into the growth and evolution of a revolutionary spirit of looking for change, of what we call theater for social change. So that's why I said what I said.
You mentioned your time in grad school, and in 1971, you yourself start to put some of this into practice with a group called El Teatro de la Esperanza. I wonder if you could talk about the origins of that group. Why did you start it? What were you aiming to do?
It's interesting because when I applied to the PhD program, there was some reticence on the part of the faculty of the dramatic art department. And the Chicano Mecha, the Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, which means the Chicano student movement of Aztlán being a Nahuatl word for the land to the north of Mexico, the land from whence the Aztecs migrated south. The Mecha students marched into the chairman's office and said, "You have a candidate." I mean, I had a master's degree. I had 3-4 years of teaching at high school and community college. I was qualified. And so, of course, when 6 Chicanos march into your office, you're going to listen. And they did. And so because of the Mechistas, I was brought in, and they had a teatro. They had a teatro called Teatro Mecha. And so I was brought in with the full intention of working with Teatro Mecha as a part of my graduate studies, etc. And there was a developing Chicano studies program at the time. So I was, as a TA, I was teaching both in Chicano studies or in the dramatic art department. And when the Mecha group fell apart, we formed in the end of the first year there, spring of 71, we formed Teatro de la Esperanza, the Theater of Hope, as a response to the need that we felt to join another student organization that was working in Santa Barbara, in the barrio, in La Casa de la Raza, or the House of the People. So we became the resident company in La Casa, and we were very proud to be a part of a community-based group, as well as university students, running workshops and performing in what we built, a little theater in the Casa.
Yes, and this is something that I find really interesting. I think some people who might not be as familiar with the type of work that you were doing would be a little surprised, but there's definitely a community-based aspect and almost a certain sociological aspect that was an important part of what you were doing with Teatro de la Esperanza. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about La Casa de la Raza, how that functioned as a part of what you were doing with the teatro.
It gave us a sense. Well, it was community. The University of California has they had a penchant for putting their universities in very wealthy neighborhoods, right? UCLA is in Westwood, Berkeley, La Jolla, the UCs, right? And UC Santa Barbara was no different. I mean, Santa Barbara, that actually is not in the middle of a wealthy area, but it wasn't in the city itself, the city of Santa Barbara, which had quite a Mexican population. So by going to the casa, we were linking with people, activists that were, in the trenches themselves as workers in the city, and others, people who became politicians eventually, etc. So it was a place, a home, it was a home. And in fact, the theater that we built, we called El Nido, a little 50-seat theater in the back of this old warehouse that they had taken over. They, the organizers of the casa, and El Nido. A nido is a nest. And we felt that the nido was a place where we were going to nurture, we were going to lay eggs, if you will, and those eggs hopefully were going to come forward with the fruits of our labor in terms of theater for social change, using the actos that had just been given to all of the teatros by the Teatro Campesino, and they were they were very fun, very entertaining. So yeah, it was very important to a lot of the students, because many of the students at UC Santa Barbara were from Los Angeles, East LA. They were mostly the children of immigrants, and who had not had access to higher education. When Luis Valdez and I were students in the 60s, he at San Jose State and me at Cal State LA, the teachers' colleges, I mean, there were not a lot of Mexican Americans in those places because we were not being educated. We were being told not to speak Spanish, et cetera, et cetera. So, we had a duty, we felt, to be involved in the community, and that continues to this day. That there are a lot of student groups that, insist on being a part of a community, organization, not within it necessarily, but, aside, alongside community-based organizations, because campuses are not necessarily friendly to students of color, etc.
This focus on education in particular, mm-hmm. I know you've done some work, you did some work in the early 70s, focusing in many ways on this particular issue. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the work that you did in Guadalupe.
Oh, gosh, yeah, that's a wonderful experience. Guadalupe was a town outside of Santa Barbara, total farm worker town, 98% Mexican and Mexican immigrants, and they were all farm workers. The growers owned the town, and there had been a big hullabaloo. They had tried to organize against the school. The school system was not offering children bilingual ed. They were punishing children for speaking Spanish. And there was any number. It was a little microcosm. This little 2,000 population town had one main street with 7 bars, and one theater. I mean, it was just, it was like a plantation. And so the parents tried to organize the schools, and they were sentenced to jail, the 3 organizers. And we were invited to go sing our songs alongside them when they were being taken to jail. And they knew, they had heard about us, the teatro, and we had learned these revolutionary songs from the Teatro Campesino and other teatros that were emerging throughout, as I say, throughout the Southwest. So we were there, and we were looking for a piece. We wanted to do a collective creation. They call it devising now. I don't get the difference between devising and collecting, but collective creation. And so we went and interviewed the residents, the people who had organized, the families, the parents of the children, and who had tried to unionize and were being, put in jail for it. And so we interviewed them, and we then eventually created a piece which we titled Guadalupe. And it was a docudrama, and it was very much in a Brechtian mode, where we would, preface every scene with, this is what's going to happen to you. To the people on stage, we involved the audience, and it put Teatro de la Esperanza on the map. It was 1974 that we created it, Cinco de Mayo of 1974. In fact, we premiered it at UC San Diego. It is a small world over here, and which is where I ended up a year later, right? Perhaps because of the production of Guadalupe that had impressed the faculty there. That what impressed the faculty and wherever we went was that we were telling the story of these untold stories, of these invisible Mexicans, the people who pick your fruit and your vegetables and etc., and how they were being oppressed by the oligarchy. And so it was the first docudrama of its kind, preceded any others, and we were very proud of that. We performed it at a festival, International Latino Chicano Theater Festival in Mexico City, the summer of '74, and it created, quite a reaction. Everybody called it a very, very, it was, here I was the director, but we worked collectively in every way. And it made our mark.
And what's particularly striking about it, I think this is perhaps something that you hear a little bit of a vague formulation sometimes, this idea of theater for change, theater for social change. There were real concrete effects that followed on from the creation and performance of this play, Guadalupe.
Well, I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that it did inspire other people to think more, theatrically. We were looking for an aesthetic that was beyond the acto. The acto, as I said before, was very, very basic, simple but not simplistic, as I've always said. But it was short, satirical sketches making fun of the enemy, and as I say, it's an incredibly impressive tool. I just published an article will be in the Latin American Theater Review on how important the acto is to this day, as a teaching tool. And so, Guadalupe became a model. I published an anthology of Chicano plays in the 80s, and I included Guadalupe and La Víctima, which was the second piece that Esperanza, the members of Esperanza, created, and it was a landmark. La Víctima, again, a docudrama that mixed fact with fantasy, and so the anthology that I published was called Necessary Theater. And so to this day, I'm looking for necessary theater, and theater for social change, I think, is necessary theater.
And you mentioned La Víctima. This is also another one which, perhaps with some very unfortunate contemporary overtones, another major production from Teatro de la Esperanza. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that play as well.
Yeah, I take great pride in knowing that we left. My wife was the musical director of Esperanza from the day we founded it, and my Armenian wife became our musical director, and she is a wonderful musical director, choral director. And so we moved to San Diego to take the position at the university. So we left the group knowing that they were prepared. They were prepared to carry on. And some of my students would say to me, well, I guess you hope they fall apart when you leave. And I said, au contraire, that will mean that I did nothing. What did I leave them with? And so we left them with, a business management tools from the business manager, musical director, and my wife. We left them with an aesthetic, and they went beyond Guadalupe to create a masterpiece called La Víctima. And it's so relevant today. What was happening in the 70s was Mexicans were being blamed for the bad economy, and they were being deported at great rates. And so we were responding to the historical fact that that's what has always happened in this country. Whenever the economy gets rough, they blame the immigrant. I mean, it's so relevant today, it's beyond belief. This is exactly why Mr. Trump has all those followers. They somehow think that these people are taking their jobs. Anyway, so the La Víctima traces a family from the revolution in Mexico, leaving Mexico, looking for a better life in the north. And then in the 30s, when the Depression hit, they started deporting the Mexicans in train loads, not in boxcars like the unfortunate Jews in the Holocaust, but they were in train. They put them on trains. And so they created this fictional family, but based on an actual fact, taking it all the way into the 70s to the present, and it could be done today. La Víctima, and again, that's also in the anthology Necessary Theater, and it's a very, very important play, a very lovely. It's been done all over. I've seen it in many, many places, and it's an incredible example of necessary theater. And as you say, so relevant today. We should be doing it now that you mention it.
Well, and speaking of relevance, one of the other things that I think is particularly interesting that you've written about in a few places is this idea of bilingualism, Spanglish, as you call it, and the effect that has as being a part of these actos in the case of Teatro Campesino and in the case of some of the works that Teatro de la Esperanza produced. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the effect of bilingualism on these plays, on your audiences.
Yeah, and I've written about this in how many different places, but the whole notion of being able to communicate in two languages is an empowering thing. And when you've been told, the first thing the colonizer does is take away your culture, take away your language, take away your religion, impose another one, et cetera, but you can't totally take away the language in a Mexican community because the parents are, recent arrivals and may not even speak English. And so, the children who are going to school, trying to learn English, and at home to learning Spanish or trying to learn Spanish. But it's an empowering thing to hear your own culture performed on stage in a language that only you understand and that only you can laugh at. And there are given words that I know when I'm going to be doing a play that this particular phrase or this particular word is always going to get a laugh from the bilingual audience members, not the kids who studied 6 years of high school Spanish. They don't seem to be able to do the code switching, it seems to me, in my experience, as well as people who grew up in it, who grew up in a bilingual home. And this bilinguality doesn't just exist in a Mexican or a Spanish-speaking community. You go to any immigrant community and you're going to find bilingual kids, right? And it's a way of saying to the non-Latino, the gringo, screw you. You don't have to understand this. This is us. This is our language. This is our culture. And if you don't get it, too bad. Eventually, of course, we wanted to embrace everybody. And so, you have to be careful with how much bilingualism you can put into a given piece. When we took Guadalupe to Mexico, and we toured it after the festival, the 2-week festival in Mexico City and Veracruz, we were invited by the Partido Socialista de Trabajadores, the PST, to tour to the villages, the ejidos in Veracruz, and there we go. And of course, we then were able to do the show in Spanish. We had to take out as much English as we could because these people were not going to understand the English. So you have to adjust, to your audience. But it's a form of empowerment to be able to say, I speak 2 languages. What about you?
I also wonder if you could talk a little bit about this, what Diana Taylor has called the aesthetics of the underdog, rascuachismo.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the Teatro Campesino in its initial stages was nothing but rascuachi. Rascuachi is a Mexican term. It's a colloquialism for something very, very funky, something that is unsophisticated. When you're driving by in East LA, there's a car on blocks in the front yard. That's rascuache. There are flowers in a coffee can, a rusty coffee can, and there's your geranium. That's a little image of a Mexican village in a coffee can. That's rascuache, and rascuache can extend to any culture, but it's about being unsophisticated. However, the Teatro Campesino and the other teatros embraced the whole notion of a rascuache aesthetic and celebrated the fact that we did not have technology. We did not have the lighting. We did not have the microphones. The early Teatro Campesino, if they were performing and it got dark, they put on truck headlights. That was their lighting. They had no microphones. We had nothing. We were very, very basic. And didn't apologize for it. Rascuache, you don't apologize for rascuachismo. You just say, here it is, go for it, go with it. It again, I think it's a sense of empowerment to know that you are celebrating your simplicity.
I wonder, you've been looking at the Chicano theater movement, among other things, as a scholar, as well as somebody who's participated in it. You've been looking at this for a number of decades. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what follows on from Teatro Campesino, from Teatro de la Esperanza. What happens over the decades? And perhaps, if you have any thoughts about this, where is the movement now?
Oh boy, yeah. So how to condense 50 years, I mean, my goodness. It's the Teatro Campesino celebrated its 50th year in 2015, last year. And I've been doing this since 1970, so it's not quite 50 years, but it sure is close, right? And so much has changed. Everybody asks me what has changed, and so this is a huge question. We have to flash forward. I think one of the most important, I have a lecture that I do, the 5 stages of Chicano theater, and the first stage was the acto. And as we proceeded to the stages of, that was the collective process. Everything was collective, very rascuache. And then as the teatros began to evolve and grow and people began to study theater formally, because initially the people doing the early teatros were not theater majors. They were poli-sci majors. There were people who were going to go on into other fields and did. The people who have walked through the different teatros that formed all over the country went into any number of fields. They were mostly university and college students, and so they've become politicians. They have become even philanthropists, and what they really became were supporters of the theater. So the theater movement, the Chicano theater movement, following the Chicano movement itself, began to evolve and grow. And when Mr. Luis Valdez, produced with the Teatro Campesino and the Center Theater Group of Los Angeles, Zoot Suit, 1978, that became the first professional Chicano play ever, written by, directed by Chicano, and with a multicultural cast of Chicanas, Chicanos, and people from every community you can imagine. And Zoot Suit was quite a phenomenon in LA. It lasted 11 months. It broke all records. No professional play, had ever lasted 11 months in Los Angeles. People don't realize that. It went to New York in 79, and unfortunately the critics didn't get it, and so it was only able to last for 4 weeks or 5. However, its run in LA put Valdez on the map, and it opened the doors to other regional theaters. They looked and they said, boy, look at what the Center Theater Group here. They made millions. They built a theater. They bought a theater with the income from Zoot Suit. Some of the income, helped by the Aquarius Theater in Hollywood, which is where they moved the play to, and you couldn't get in. It was so popular. And ironically, Mike, as we discussed before this, the play Zoot Suit is going to be remounted at the Mark Taper Forum, Center Theater Group LA, in January of this coming year. How many years later? And Mr. Valdez will direct it again. So we are all extremely excited about that. So we've come a long way. We've come a long way in the interim from the farm worker movement and the teatro movement, the early teatro movement. Then we move into universities. When I became a professor at UC San Diego in 1975, I was the first. I tell people I was the first Chicano to get a PhD in theater, which I seem to have been, in 1974. And now I'm certainly not the only Chicana or Chicano, Latina or Latino with a PhD in theater, And so it's an incredibly broad movement that moved into the regional theaters where the artistic directors began to look for Latina, Latino, now we're calling Latinx plays. And that's because of Zoot Suit. On the West Coast, Short Eyes on the East Coast, Miguel Piñero's phenomenal prison play, which had been done in 1974 on Broadway, also opened doors. And so we had theater companies across the country from the various communities. On the West, we had the Chicano theater companies, and the Midwest as well, and then also the Puerto Rican companies, the Cuban American and Cuban companies on the East Coast, the Southeast in New York and what have you. And eventually these people began to collaborate. In 1986, the Ford Foundation funded a national conference of 125 people doing what they called then Hispanic American theater. And that was a very, very important coming together and learning about one another and growing together and seeing what we needed to do. And now we have an online, network through HowlRound, through the Latino Theater Commons. It's a national movement now that is not just Chicana or Chicano. It is Latinx. It's scholars. It's artists. It's an amazing growth. We have professors teaching across the country, teaching in theater departments as well as in Spanish Lit or women's studies, you name it. We have more plays than I can teach in a year. You cannot teach all the plays that have been published by these playwrights and theater groups across the country. And it's very, very exciting. I tell people that we communicated with 2 tin cans and a string back in the 60s and 70s. A joke. That's what we did. Actually, we grew up, do you know that? If you put a nail in a can and a string and you have another can with the string connected, you can talk like a walkie-talkie. Are you following me?
Oh, I think I remember trying to do that when I was young. Oh, yeah.
Well, that's what we did. Well, you were much younger anyway. And so now, we have the social media. Now we have the internet. We have instant communication. And it's an important, wonderful, wonderful thing to see. We have people at the national levels of the president of the Association for Theater and Higher Education is a professor, Patricia Ibarra, professor of theater at Brown University, and on and on. Diane Rodriguez, who was one of the founders of Teatro de la Esperanza in 1971, one of my first students and theater students at UC Santa Barbara, then became a member of the Teatro Campesino, and now is an associate artistic director at the Center Theater Group, where they're going to remount Zoot Suit, which she was in 1978. Diane Rodriguez has been appointed by President Obama to the National Council on the Arts. I mean, and Luis Valdez had been appointed prior. So we have come a long way, baby. We are trying to make the invisible visible.
You write in an essay from last year on the 50th anniversary of Teatro Campesino that, and I'm quoting you here directly, sadly, every one of the issues that Teatro exposed is still relevant. I wonder if you might consider addressing that. And you mentioned sort of this explosion in new communications. The world maybe hasn't changed that much, but it has changed in some ways. I wonder what you see for the future. How do we address the fact that some of the same issues are still a problem? Are there new ways to address it? Or is there something that we need to keep and preserve from the tradition of groups like Teatro de la Esperanza?
One of the major changes, and I'm publishing an article in an anthology about change. What I have seen in the last 50 years in our movement, in the Chicano theater movement, Latinx theater movement. That, as I said earlier, there's no Chicano theater company. They're mixed. They're Latina, Latino, or Latinx now, and they include Afro Latinos. They include Cuban Americans, Puerto Rican, you name it, people from all parts of the Americas, as well as non-Latinos, who want to be a part of these theater companies. And so they have a totally different perspective than people did when the teatro movement first began. One, these people have all studied theater. A lot of these people come out of MFA programs in playwriting. They come out of MFA programs in directing, in dramaturgy, in stage management, but they want to work in their own communities. The biggest difference as I see the new plays that are being published is that more and more the plays that are going to get produced by the regional theaters are not going to be as bilingual as we could be back then. Now, there's a company here in Los Angeles, Casa 0101 in Boyle Heights, the East LA, where I was actually born. And this company, founded by Josefina Lopez, founded Casa 0101 several years ago, and now it's a major producing place in East LA with a beautiful 99-seat theater, multi-million-dollar plant. Her audience continues to be very, very bilingual. But there are other companies that are not necessarily in the middle of a barrio, right? And the younger generations are not going to be as bilingual. In fact, every immigrant community that has come to this country, studies have shown that by the third generation, they are monolingual English speakers. And so this is what happens. So now we have these playwrights that can't write bilingually. The younger generation. It's not their reality. They didn't grow up in a home where the parents were farm workers who didn't speak English. They're probably the children of college graduates, right? So there's this whole new middle and upper middle class that is being addressed, and the language thing it's sort of disappearing. It depends on the play. It depends on the play and the playwright. Is that good or bad? I don't know, but it definitely. When I go to Casa 0101. What Josefina Lopez has done is miraculous because she's built an audience that is young. If I go to the regional theaters and I'm going to be 74 next month, and the regional theaters, I feel like a young person. They're old, they're dying away. But the Latino theater companies have, they continue to appeal to the younger crowd, the people who want to see themselves on stage, who want to see their realities portrayed. And it's happening more and more. There's a company in Los Angeles, the Latino Theater Company, that is in charge of the Los Angeles Theater Center, an incredible place, downtown LA, 5 theater spaces, large and small, and they produce any number of plays from any number of communities. But they are unique in the country in that they have an ensemble. The Latino Theater Company has been around over 30 years. And these are professional actors, directors, you name it, playwrights, and who you will see in movies, often unfortunately playing the maids and the drug dealers and, the victims and the victimizers. But they have created a theater company, Evelina Fernandez, who started her career in a Chicano theater in East LA, moved into Zoot Suit as an actress, and is now a brilliant playwright and actor. And they're doing her trilogy, the Mexican trilogy, at the LATC, and they are attracting crowds, of any number of communities with professional theater that addresses the history of. It's sort of the roots of the Mexican American in LA. This trilogy, which was published by Samuel French, that wouldn't even publish Zoot Suit many years ago because it hadn't succeeded on Broadway. I mean, that's, the nature of the publishing industry. That's a whole other story.
Well, we're going to provide links in the show notes to all these, to the Latino Theater Company, to Casa O101, as well as your 2015 HowlRound essay on Teatro Campesino, and your 2012 speech on Teatro de la Esperanza. Jorge, thank you so much for speaking with us today. It was really great.
Well, thank you, Mike, and good luck. And I look forward to hearing this.